So now let's have a look at the second design tool of our learning architecture, which is the learning sequence design tool. As you are going through this tool, you will notice that we have a few endnotes. For example, as indicated in the endnote here, you can either hover over the endnote, or you can go down the bottom to see explanations that we felt would support your understanding of this design tool a little better. So it's up to you how you use those endnotes, but I just felt that it was important to explain. So what you will see in this first page is quite simple. It is almost the practical part of our learning sequence design tool, the subject, the year level, what term it is that you are teaching, and what unit or topic. It's important that you remember that this learning sequence will be a term long, and we've spoken about why it's going to be a term long, and that all teachers must teach the same learning sequence at the same time. However, I like to remind you of what I said before. Asking you to teach the same learning sequence is not asking you not to change anything in that learning sequence. Indeed, you will see in the next page that you are compelled by your student data to change certain activities, certain performances of understanding, even the order in which you will do things. What we mean by the same learning sequence at the same time is basically the same topic within the time guidelines that you have. So please remember this. The learning sequence must be adapted, there you go, by each teacher to suit the need of their class. The table below is copy and paste from your map. Why are we doing this? Because your map is for a semester or for a year, and this is only one topic. So you will transfer the information for this particular term, for this particular topic, so you don't have to go back and forth in your map to know what it is that this unit of work is covering. So copy and paste from the map. Then in the next page, this is where you will be informed by your data to start the personalization for your class. So you will write the names of the students for each of the instructional groups. As I said before, you may not have 4 instructional groups. If you are taking an accelerated class, hopefully you will only have at the age appropriate and above the age appropriate. And indeed, if your acceleration class is formed according to the acceleration principles, you will only have 1 instructional group, which is all your students are functioning above the age appropriate level of literacy. Okay, so after you have the names of your students and you know where your bell curve is skewed, do you have more students who are just below the level or way below the level? And do you have perhaps only 1 or 2 students who are functioning above the level? Whatever it is that will help you to know how to adjust or modify the learning sequence so that you can ensure growth for all your students, and that you don't forget that one student who is functioning above the age appropriate level, because in the midst of having to look after 25 students who are perhaps the majority of them needing that extra support, you might be quite likely to forget that one student who very rightly deserves to be accelerated. But if you know you have that student, you have planned for that student, you will not forget to engage that student with activities that are appropriate to that level of readiness. So The next step is to write the names of the students who have additional complex needs, such as they may be an EAL student, they may be a student with visual impairment, they may be a student with other additional needs that will have been provided to you by the well-being coordinator or the year level coordinator. And it is always prudent to refer to the assessment reports for those students because they often include specific strategies that you can include in your teaching and learning to facilitate the learning of those students. And you can then list those strategies here so that you do not forget when it comes to your classroom practice. Finally, in this section, we have reflective practice. This is basically for you. No one needs to see this. You don't need to share this with anyone unless you want to share it with your triad. But that's about you measuring the impact of your teaching at strategic intervals as you are looking at what growth your students are achieving through the independent tasks from lesson to lesson. But it's also for you to identify your professional learning needs. For example, if you have an EAL student and you think, well, I'm not EAL trained, I don't really know the EAL continuum, what do I do with this student? So if you identify that as a professional learning needs, you can seek support so that you are ready to support every student in your classroom. You have a right to seek support for your professional learning needs. Okay, so planning for learning is our next section, and you've already done this because you've already scaffolded the tiered summative task, and we've already provided you with a video that you can use to understand the process of scaffolding tiered tasks. And you also work with triads or other teachers who've been through the process, and you have unpacked an already created tier task which gives you a deeper understanding. But essentially what you see here are just prompts that describe the principles that sit behind the 3 levels of complexity. And I've already spoken about those when I was describing this phase of our cycle of teaching and learning earlier on in this video. So I will now go to the next section, which is the getting learning ready. I want to invite you respectfully to take this section here seriously. A lot of our teachers, or a lot of the time, we tend to go straight to, okay, now I'm going to plan, I'm going to use my essential questions and I'm going to plan my activities. When we do that, we have deprived our students of their right to understand the context within which the learning will take place. And we now, from the growth mindset research and a body of a lot of other research that tells us that when we create the context appropriately, we actually allow learners to feel confident that the learning will take place is the appropriate learning for them. So what do we do here, and how do we read this? On the left hand side, you will see that it talks about the things that teachers do. These are actually prompts, nothing else that prompts. This is not telling you, you do this first, you do this second. These are prompts to remind you that if you address these elements, you will actually be building the context for the learning. And you begin by, of course, introducing the topic and then the enduring understandings and big ideas. Why? Because we want students to know that the learning that's happening here contributes to the lifelong learning. As we said before, when we were unpacking the principle of big ideas and enduring understandings. So every learning, every topic that we introduce to students needs to be connected to enduring understanding and big ideas, because it is then connected to lifelong learning. The next thing we do is we introduce the essential questions, because the learning is structured around those essential questions. So the students know how the learning is chunked. When they have unpacked the essential questions, they are anticipating what's going to happen next. They are cognizant of what the learning entails, so that at each stage of the learning, they are active participants in that learning. Then we explain the students the way that we will learn. And I guess the early stages of year 7, we will be talking a lot about understanding the gradual release of responsibility. But as our students move from year 7 to year 8 to year 9, we only need to remind them the phases of the gradual release, such as you will be shown, we will make connections to prior learning, we will show you what this learning is about, we will be working together to make sure you understand what the learning is about, you will be working with your colleagues and exchanging ideas, and you will be doing an independent task that will give us evidence whether you have learned something and we can move on, or we have to come back and revisit something to help you to make sure that you are growing according to expectations. So the language we will use to explain how we learn around here will either be explicitly teaching the gradual release of responsibility in the earlier times, or just reminding the students of the protocol that's called the gradual release of responsibility, so that at all times they know they are supported. The next step is that we will show them what the 3 tiers of the summative assessment task are. We won't give them the summative assessment task, but we'll inform them what the 3 tiers are. And wherever possible, and I advise that it is more often than not, we give them the instructional rubric, so that they know what the quality of the work, and they can keep monitoring their progress and their readiness towards this summative task as they are moving from each essential question to another. Next, we do our pre-assessment, whether we do it through questioning or pre-test or quizzes or any other form that you have decided is appropriate with your team. We do the pre-assessment to identify students' entry point into this set of skills specifically, and into this topic as well. Finally, we will introduce any tools, whether they are literacy tools, numeracy tools, critical and creative thinking tools, graphic organizers, anything that we have included in the learning activities. We introduce them to students so that they recognize them when they see them during the learning. And then we come to the final part. You will see that you have some embedded documents here that give you exemplars of strategies you can use. You can choose to use those or choose to ignore those. We pre-teach the vocabulary, the key vocabulary of the topic that we are about to teach, so that the students, we ensure that the students are familiar with the language of the topic, and that will of course be not an inhibitor, but it will be an enabler to their learning. Often lack of knowledge of the vocabulary and lack of knowledge of the language of the topic becomes great inhibitor, not just of the students who are below or they are not at the age appropriate level, but also can become an inhibitor for the students who have the correct readiness to learn. So please be mindful that the teaching of the vocabulary is essential, and our literacy leader will talk to you about that as well, and it's one of our literacy across the curriculum priorities at the college. Finally, we are now planning for the explicit teaching of new learning. So the way we do that is we use our essential questions, because as we clarified before, our essential questions are our learning intentions, with the what, the how, and the why. And from those, we draw the purpose for the lesson. We design evidence-based learning experiences around each essential question, to adhere to the gradual release of responsibility, including the checking for understanding activity between the phases of the gradual release of responsibility. And so whether you use the table below to do this, or whether you design them on a separate Word document and you embed it here, it's up to you. But it has, in the left hand column, you are simply describing your activities. For example, if I use a think, pair, share for a guided instruction activity, in my left hand column I will write use think, pair, share to give students an opportunity to understand what questioning in science looks like. That's all you need to write. Whereas in the right hand column, you describe the activity exactly as if your students were right there in front of you. So it might look like use the think, pair, share activity to develop a deep understanding of the principles behind scientific questions. Independently, look at the questions provided and categorize them into a scientific and non-scientific, and write your explanation why. Find someone in your class to compare your answers. If you have a disagreement, ask what makes you say that. When you reach an agreement, you either change your question so you help your partner, change your answer, or you help your partner to change their answer. Finally, share with another group of students, or share with the class your answers to what is a scientific question and what is not. So you speak to your students as if you have them in front of you. There will be a lot more work done here. You will be working with your mentors or the appropriate leaders to create annotated worked examples from your own subject, from learning sequences that have already been designed. You will work to annotate one to support your deeper understanding of how do we write according to the gradual release of responsibility. But you also have access to an amazing pedagogical toolbox created at the school, where you can tap in to find exemplars and also performances of understanding and activities that you can use to develop your own learning sequences.